Welcome everyone to another episode of Notes from the Aleph. An Aleph is a high point from which all things are visible, and from our vantage point we'll be looking at tabletop role-playing games, their design, and the theory behind those designs. Around here our motto is to be fair, build up, and have fun. I'm your host, GriffinVarro, joined by our editor Theta, our local designer Norman Rafferty, and our good friend and GM RedRabbit. When it comes to tabletop games, I have 15 years of experience running, playing, and frequently fixing problematic rule sets at the table. Pronouns he, him, they, them. And let's go with lessons next.
Hey, hi everybody. I run the Sunday game here on Rectus. Currently, we're doing Shadowrun, Mirrored Souls, Shadowrun 5th Edition, which is the least complicated rule system so far they've thrown out. Question mark. Anyway, and also I'm a writer over at Amazon, and Nights and Starts is my short story collection, and I run my own Twitch channel, which is Lessons Learned 1. I'm still playing Dragon Age Inquisition because it's a very, very long game. And also have my YouTube channel over at Lessons Learned. You have my gaming videos and the like.
All right. Rafferty, why don't you tell us who you are?
Hello, world. I'm Norman Rafferty, he, him. I work for sanguinegames.com, where we make games. We're doing it for quite a while. And really, hopefully by the time you watch this, Book of Corals is already out for our Iron Claw. And we're making some other stuff, too. If you manage to see this before April 14th, come see us at First Squared.
And last but not least, Red.
Hey guys, RedRabbit here. I am running our Wednesday Ironclaw game. I'm also playing in our Sunday Forbidden Lands game, and in addition to that, I am running Vampire 5th Edition and also Monster Care Squad. And I'm someone who owns way more RPGs than he will ever play.
I think we all understand that feeling. So, for today's topic, you know what? I am so tired of hearing players complain that they completed all of their objectives, or why that only half of them died during a fight. If it's not a total party wipe, they're just not happy. These statements from players would be absurd, and yet some complaints like these can be found coming from game masters seemingly unsatisfied that their players won the scenarios that they crafted. Today we're going to look at what drives this perspective that letting your players win is not fun, and if there's even any truth to it. So, who would like to go ahead and tackle that first?
Well, it's an interesting perspective. I could offer my own suggestion there as someone who is guilty of feeling that way from time to time, even though I know, higher brain. Lizard brain is mad.
Example of feeling that way. When did it happen? Why did you feel that way?
Oh, well, I'm really bad when people ask for the examples, right? Because this stuff does not stick in my head maybe the way that it should. But I can tell you, in abstract experiences have gone this way, where you have come up with a circumstance, a situation, a challenge, or a set piece moment, and you've examined it from every conceivable angle to try to make sure that it's something that will pose an interesting and considerable challenge to your players, right? And then through luck or just unforeseeable circumstance, they will approach it and find a way that makes so much sense and also completely invalidates all of that prep work. I think that's where it comes from the most for me, is when I sit there and think God damn, there's no way I have to throw all of this work out now, and it feels like a failure. So that could be part of the problem, maybe.
Right, yeah. Nobody likes taking their work and going, well, I guess that lasted a whole 6 seconds.
Right, and I always feel bad because I'm going to be the angry contrarian here of saying well, if you know me, I've been saying as a player, I would feel frustrated because I know that when the game master puts down a large tactical map, or as a big setting, that they have a specific way in mind they want it to play out. And so now I'm torn because on the one hand, hey, I would hate to invalidate all of that hard work that the game master did. But now we have to question, what is a role-playing game? I thought people were complaining that role-playing games were nothing but tactical fights and scripted. They were supposed to be about storytelling and weaving and improvising and telling your own story. So am I supposed to tell my own story, or am I supposed to shut up, and take this situation that's being fed to me and deal with it exactly the way that's been dictated in advance.
Yeah,
Right.
that evokes something I think we might talk about a little later about scripting versus playing. And I think the middle ground, I think I go with Red's point of view, is like you have this idea in your mind. Yeah, this dragon is going to be the most powerful thing, and it's going to be able to breathe fire. And I can imagine the fighter trying to dodge this and that. And then when you go up, it's like the mage shows up and it's like disintegrate, right? And that is not a failure of the players. That falls squarely on us, the GMs. Because
No, that's actually, well, I would even go a little further and say, I'm not so much failure of the GM, that's kind of a failure of the game. I mean, like I've already complained in the past that there are certain stories you'd want to tell, but your game will make those impossible.
But I guess the preconception is that you bring in this idea that this is going to have to happen in a certain way. And I think that's encouraged by maybe the rules, certainly rules, but also expectations about role-playing games, especially from a GM position, because the GMs, we're told, we're kind of like the overlords, right? We are the crafters of worlds and encounters and all that, which is mostly our role, but we're not the crafters of the final experience. We're just a setup. The payoff happens in the table. And if a player is crafty enough, it's like, well, we'll just set up a trap, or I will use a spell. Maybe the dragon will make the saving throw, maybe they won't, right? Because the opposite is exactly when the encounter does kind of go more or less as you think, but not because you expect it. It's because they fail saving throw, something like that. Like I think a counter this was a demon fight that we had on D&D, where basically it was this modified homebrew creature that had the party trapped in a room, and they could essentially chuck a fireball that kept burning for a very long area. But you had characters that could banish this demon. It just so happens the demon made their saving throws, right? But if they had banished the demon, that was fair. That's in the rules, right? I shouldn't have been like, well,
Yeah.
I guess I should feel cheated
because
because
resources to it. They used their resource. They solved the problem.
Right.
And in fact,
there were steps that led up to there. It just wasn't something the players necessarily predicted was going to happen beyond saying, I want to be prepared if it does.
I'm going to take a little slant, like when you say prediction. See, old school games used to be very roguelike. You used to start with a bunch of random numbers, and your abilities were highly random. Spells you had access to were random. Loot was randomly found and identified. And so your progress was out of your control. You were getting things and then managing them. But in modern games, they give you a lot of choices. At level 1, choose this. At level 3, choose this. When you level up, every spellcasting class chooses their spellcasting. And so every level of a character's growth is now planned. This means that by definition, everything the players can do is something they chose. They chose to be a wizard or a cleric. They picked these abilities. And if there's subclass abilities, they picked those too. So if a situation comes up where the abilities that they chose could change the situation, if you're going to be your auteur or whatever and say, no, I don't care that you chose this ability over that, that you consciously chose something that you wanted to do in the game. I am going to tell you right now, this thing you want to do doesn't work. And to me, that's really terrible, because the player, made intelligent decisions. When the player chose those abilities, they're telling you as the GM, these are things I want to do. And if you're just going to nerf them because you have some larger design in mind, then you're basically telling the player your character is invalid.
Yeah.
Right. And I think the roguelike part kind of strikes up an interesting question for me. So we've talked before about like playing to lose, right? You are creating these encounters on the assumption that your players are going to win. You're not going to try to end your story by murdering your players. You don't do that intentionally. But if it was a roguelike experience, then you're just sort of setting things up on the board and sort of seeing what happens. since you've been at this for a while, since you're as old as dinosaurs, right, Rafferty? At what point would you say this transition happened from this roguelike creation status to planning to lose? When did that happen? And do you think maybe that part of this is people holding over from that roguelike experience?
I think I'm not sure what the first point-based game is. The first point-based game I can think of is Champions, the Hero System superhero game, but there might be an earlier one. But that's the first game, because that's like 1980, and that's the first game where everything about your character is a conscious choice. There are games before that, like Rollmaster, that would give you skill points to manipulate, but those were randomly assigned. So those are at best transitional, because you randomly got that. The Champions is the first game where everything on your sheet is a conscious choice that you picked for this discussion. And so, like, that's the first one where we have to acknowledge that everything the player is picked to do. But I mean, like, slightly before that, I think, if people pick certain things. There's also, like I said, the question of the game. Like, there's always the problem where it's not that a player would choose to be able to raise the dead, necessarily, but a game like Dungeons and Dragons will give you a raise dead ability at a very low level. So, you have to acknowledge that's there. I mean, like, I've had players complain that, like, they get a lot of killing power they don't want to have. Like, if I play a wizard in D&D, I have no choice. Eventually, Fireball is going to be accessible to me. And eventually,
it is very difficult to make a character who does not do damage as a wizard.
Right, especially because of the expectations. So, and also, I mean, I'm not sure exactly when it happened, but I've already railed against a lot of adventures are written in such a way that, like, the whole dungeon mentality, as I've said before, is how far can we get and how much loot can we get out of here before we're killed? And I think it's like when Dragonlance arrives on the scene, the Dragonlance comes with stories, but also with tabletop adventures that you could participate in. And the tabletop adventures you participate in mimic the novel scenes. There's the dramatic elevator fight with the Gully Dwarfs, and Zach Saroff, I think, is in DL1. So I guess that's the first one. Or you meet Gold Moon on the road and she's singing a song, then the sheet music is given to you. Like, these are examples of, like, they had those kinds of scripted encounters showing up in Dragonlance.
But more than that, I guess we'll go to the more scripted area when we talk about that later. And especially in the revised version, when they released, I think, the 25th edition version of the book, which I have somewhere around here, they literally tell you, if your characters fail here, deploy this contrivance so they can keep on playing. Right? Your characters got knocked out because a rock hit them in the head or something, which is, if you're writing a novel, makes good sense, I suppose, because you want the character to stay alive. It's a possibility. But if you have a game that says, well, if rock falls and you take 10d6 damage and you're third level characters, you're going to get squished, and that's the end of your character. Enter the code to have your characters survive this adventure.
I think that's a good point, a good reason for it, because, like, if you're at a table and you have the expectation that you're going to be there for 4 hours, but they solve it in 2, you kind of want to figure out how to fill those 2 hours, because otherwise that would be unsatisfying for everyone to some extent to go, all right, guys, you solved it really early today. We're just done. The 2 hours you planned to be having fun, they're over.
Well, that's why I've been asking about this transition to performative role play. Like, what you're asking is, if you're assuming that the GM's role is as writer, set director, and director, and hey guys, I have all these set props, we have to use them and we have to fill 2 hours. I can't have you bypass this fight. This has to go the way. If the players have the expectation that we're supposed to fill 4 hours of time, then your players can shift to a lower level of engagement, where their goal is to represent their characters and to fill time, but to only act within certain parameters. And this is where I have to reinforce this entire idea of the players winning too early. For that to be a concept, that the players could end this fight early, could only exist if you give the players free will or control to end it early. If you take that control away, you can make this, you can do what we just described in Dragonlance. You can just make up a reason and just tell the players, I don't want it to end now, so it doesn't. And whether that's okay or not is a question of what game you're playing. If you're the Critical Role people and it's all performative and you're supposed to fill time, those actors will nod and say, okay, we get it, we have to fill more time, and roll with it. But that's not, you won't see that text in Dungeons and Dragons or in Vampire that says, by the way, when your GM tells you it's not time to win yet, shut the hell up and roll with it and do what they say. You won't see that text in there. So if that's a concept we should be entertaining, we need to tell players that. Otherwise, you'll run into the toxic problem we just talked about, where the players are, I'm making conscious choices, I'm rolling dice, I'm spending my willpower or story points in specific ways to get progress. Oh, wait, none of this really matters because I'm supposed to do what I'm supposed to do.
Yeah. I think also it's a matter of, and each game has its own tempo, right? And ironically, I've discovered this mostly by being a GM on stream, right? That, for example, D&D 5th edition, it says it still kind of follows the rule of the 4 combats. I mean, that's the assumption per encounter. But in fact, is because of the way it is, patching for post 4th edition, you usually have one big combat.
Mm-hmm.
So if you decide this is the night going to be combat, it's going to be combat, and then you may have a little bit of off time before and after, right, at the aftermath. And also you have your session, which is the old goat shopping session, which is the people just call the role-playing session. If you're playing Shadowrun, usually it's a 2 to 3 session affair because you have the setup, then you have the investigation, and then you have the execution. It doesn't guarantee you will feel every minute of the time, but you have to understand the tempo of play, more or less.
Yeah, and I can definitely see that when I think of scheduling, and I'm kind of going, all right, the first hour is going to be players deciding what to do, the second hour is going to be a 1-hour combat, the third is going to be recovering from that, and the fourth is going to be figuring out where they're going to go next, so I can prepare that for the next session. And that usually is kind of a very valid schedule, because it's very hard to break from that, and you can easily extend 40 minutes into 50 minutes if you need to.
Right, and of course we have the problem where D&D Fort games are dragged kicking and screaming into that because they're not designed to be that. They are designed to be 13 rooms, 3 traps, 6 empties, and 4 combats. That's what
you're supposed to snap through them, right? Not deliberate every single one.
They're supposed to be small little endurance things, and you're not supposed to rest in between each room. But you're not seeing, most of them are falling on, I want to call an act structure, like a 3-act structure we described. Act 1, introduce. Act 2, rising action. Act 3, climax, which is more fun from a storytelling point of view. But you're going to, and really, I mean, I think to get back to the topic here, we're having the problem where if that's the way it's scripted, they go, they investigate, they fight, they win, and you only have provisions for it playing out exactly that way, then you've fallen into a performative style of play. And your players may pick up on that we're going, this is the investigation part, so we do what we're supposed to. And we will eventually get to the climax part where we will get into a fight. And 1 or 2 of us might go down, but we're pretty much going to win because the adventure is scripted that we're going to win, or it's scripted that we're going to lose. So we're kind of killing time. And if your players pick up on that and they're not being performative on purpose, then your players might not pick up on that, but they might rebel against it because they were told that this was a game about me and me doing crazy stuff and telling my story. And instead, I'm getting trapped into a plot outline that's supposed to fill time. So your players can get angry or dissatisfied. And if you're lucky, they'll leave. If you're unlucky, you'll get an angry, dissatisfied person who keeps showing up every week, and it's going to cause toxic problems.
Right, and I've been looking at a module recently where, that kind of exact padding sort of happens. Like, all right, so here's one event that's dangerous, and here's the next event that's dangerous, but there's 7 days in between where you cannot really do anything or actively pursue something. You're just supposed to expect it to happen to you. And at that point, people do immediately disengage because there's nothing for you to do. You can't actively affect the story in that way because that's the way it got set up.
The solution to it actually is to give the scenario more options, no less. to the GM has to give himself doors he can go out. It's like, okay, this guy got killed in 5 minutes. Okay, no problem. There's more bad guys that will show up later, right? The players lose, and hopefully they die or whatever. Well, you can roll up with a new party, or you can have their allies or henchmen come in and try to fill it in, right? Instead of, because I think the idea is that we get stymied. It's like, oh, part of the reason why it feels like bad is like, oh, what do I do now as a GM, right? And I have no way of moving forward because I put all my eggs in the proverbial basket of the BBGE, right? And
right.
Right. I thought this would last an hour. You guys solved it in 5 minutes, and now I have to figure out how to keep this going. Yeah.
Or a little more emphasis on what about a lateral solution? Like I've been complaining about how or some games have labels as good and evil, but then you get into a scenario where we're expected to slaughter everyone. Like I think I've told the story before, where we're in a D&D dungeon. We're in a D&D desert and a wilderness encounter, and we met the Dryad who has a big tree. And, we just launch into a big speech of, listen, lady, we just need to get past you. We don't care. And we could burn this whole place to the ground because you're in the desert. What are you going to do? So we would like to pass. And, here's a whole big combat encounter that, the GM didn't write it because it's a scripted adventure. But this, to me, was supposed to be the strength of a scripted adventure, that we could bypass this entire combat. It's a huge involved combat. The Dryad's got, minions and that kind of stuff. But we came to parlay. We're serious about it. And also it was like, look, she doesn't want to die, and we don't want to do anything here. So the fact that their GM let us get past that, was a good thing. And that's the kind of stuff that should be showing up in the games. If I had to sit there and go through a big fight and beat up someone who I had no animosity towards and didn't accomplish any of my goals, I'd actually feel bad, because it was like, this was pointless.
It was a pointless murder at that point, right?
No one
really feels good about those.
The problem there, I think, is also priorities. I would have scripted it. Well, not scripted it. That's part of the problem. Yeah. I would have prepared that the fight would have been the thing that happens if the players fail to convince the Dryad.
Right. At which point you're still putting into the module, here's all these stats, here are the combat tactics, here's the morale.
Yeah, but
you need to preface and set a scenario. Yeah, that's the key missing part of those.
I would suggest that the purpose of pre-published material, like Red said earlier, where I would feel bad if I prepared all this stuff and couldn't use it. I would suggest that the purpose of a published module should be full of more stuff than you could ever use. That they should have, it's okay to have the Dryad set up and all of this stuff, in case a fight breaks out. And then we could just bypass it because, hey, we didn't, you didn't have to do all that work. That's there in case we were the kinds of assholes who wanted to kill a Dryad, but we're not. In fact, this is where a lot of confusion started to start up, because if you go through old school modules or whatever, you'd see that they write up every single NPC. Here we are at the Keep in the Borderlands. The Castellan of the Keep has a full character write-up, and here's his room with all his stuff in it. You'll never get in a fight here. If you're getting a fight in the Keep in the Borderlands, you're making a huge mistake. Because this is
here are the classes and levels of every character here. Building the stats is an exercise for the reader now.
Right, but and this just gets to a step thing of when we talk about Morrowind versus Skyrim, because Morrowind was the last version of Elder Scrolls that worked like a tabletop game. Because in a tabletop game, if I killed the Castellan of the Keep, or I killed a plot critical NPC, they would stay dead. And Morrowind is like the last holdout of the games that lets you kill anyone. Because after that, if someone's plot critical, they just can't die. And that kind of brute force stuff I expect in a video game that's not supposed to roll with me. And that's why, I can't speak for other people, but I don't want my tabletop games to be like computer games in that way. I accept the computer game rigidity because it's a highly sculpted experience with professional recordings and professional motion captures to entertain me. And it's like a puzzle to be solved. And I also get infinite restarts. I can restore from a save game. At the tabletop game, time is supposed to be linear. If we blow up the library, we can't check out books later. If we're going to do a linear story where actions have consequences, then we can't be that scripted.
Hey, Red, I want to toss you a thing. So this is a vampire thing, and we've both run it, and here's something I want to share as a feeling. have you ever had problems statting out elder vampires where you are unsatisfied that they either have too little or are afraid that they have too much simultaneously, but you know your players are going to come into conflict with them?
Yes, I have experienced that.
It is such a difficult and fine balancing act because we're doing the thing previously where we said, well, we want the fight to last for a while, but vampire is also a system where if you do get into combat, the fight can end very, very, very quickly. And it could
Yeah.
very much end oddly in either favor very quickly as well.
Well, so I think this is another good example of how Dungeons and Dragons and similar games have set a strange sort of expectation for how games are supposed to go.
Yeah,
Where
you're supposed to fight the biggest vampire at the end of the campaign or something, right? Yeah.
right, and not only that, but even in the way it's prepared, I think D&D is a game where a lot of it is a lot of the role playing, I think, as designed, is pretense for setting up combat encounters, right? Like, once the game is going, you can just kind of, as long as you can come up with another reason for 6 more goblins to enter the scene, you can keep a D&D game going for 8 hours, because so much of it is that marble machine mechanically. So I think
Yeah.
when we look at other games like Vampire and a lot of these RPGs that are trying to model much more of like a cinematic experience. I mean, people play D&D very cinematically. I think mechanically D&D is not a cinematic experience in the way that Vampire is. Because there's a lot of, in Vampire, what they're telling you is that you're going to get into circumstances where you are, bemoaning the loss of a loved one and things that don't have a lot of mechanical crunch to them. So, but still, our instinct as game masters, when we look at the book, is to say, oh, okay, well, at this point in the story, there's going to be a big dramatic fight. Let's look at the rules for this big dramatic fight. And that's where you get into these cases where it's like, wow, there's not a lot of provisions made for creating a challenging antagonist that will
Creating
one
a
for
fair
one.
antagonist would
A
be the
fair
term, I
antagonist.
think. Yeah.
That's a better way to put it. You're right.
Because you could very easily make an unfair one in either direction, almost guaranteed. But let's talk about like the non-combat provisions. Let's say if you have like a social conflict going on, you have like players at a party and an NPC at a party, and they are competing for some sort of attention. So when it comes to letting the players win too easily, you've almost certainly been in the position where you're trying to figure out how these NPCs would not just immediately agree to what the players are proposing, right?
Yes.
And let me go ahead and say, I'm going to guess that you two will immediately go, well, everything the players said made perfect sense. There's no reason that they would say no, but go ahead and roll a die anyway.
Yeah. Well, you
And
also
now they're
need
going to lose.
And now they're going to lose. Yes, and then
now
you
they're going to
start
start a
to get
fight
very
because they lost
creative.
social conflict, and now only fighting is left.
Well, see, this is where I feel okay. So this is where we have to ask a question of design. Like, now that we're in the intelligent design era of gaming, like instead of the from rogue like randomness to intelligent design. Once again, you have chosen everything on your sheet. You made charisma your dump stat. So
Yes.
should we, as game design, see, this is where I like to call, like I was calling this the path of Robolar. Like if you look up Robolar, he was one of the characters in Gary Gygax's original D&D game. And this was a guy who could talk his way out of any problem. Like he could solo an entire dungeon because, well, I've got a cloak of Elvenkind, so the monsters just don't see me, right? And I've got boots of Elvenkind, so they don't hear me, right? And because he could just describe how he was getting through something, and because D&D, first edition or early editions was just combat and nothing else, like, I guess make a roll or whatever, horrors lie to you in a 45% chance, whatever. That it was just arbitrary, that they could talk their way through everything. And one reason why I'm always angry against Fail Forward is because to me, Fail Forward feels like we only roll dice when it's combat, but we can talk our way through anything. And so things like social skills, charisma, negotiation, athletic skills to bypass stuff, or even being a thief is a pointless waste of your time, because any player who can just be reasonable and engage the world maturely can just talk their way through something. So when the player, so I've had players in my game who they had charismas of 8 or 6. But when you play with them, you don't know that, because when they play their characters, they're reasonable. They negotiate with people. They'll pay bribes. If some guy says 100 gold across the bridge, they'll just reach over and hand it.
And the only time you learn that they've dumped it is when you ask them to actually make the roll, and they're like, well, I got a 4.
Right. It's only right. And so this always gets in the question of like role playing. Like that's a side argument about whether if my character has an intelligence of 6, if I'm supposed to play him as stupid. But this is the flip side of that, which is, a player like that is also gaming the system. They know, this is what I've been complaining about, this whole failing forward thing. They know that you're only going to ask them what their numbers are during combat. So they can show up at your vampire game with celerity 5 and potence 5, because they know that if you need them to negotiate with other vampires, they can just talk their way through it. They don't actually need manipulation or charisma to do that.
Yeah, I want to tag up on that, but before we get too far from what Griff said, I do want to highlight it because I think it pertains directly to the thesis statement of this episode too, and point out something, which is that oftentimes success means that your game master has to do more work. I think that's another thing that leads to a lot of resentment towards player success. If you put them in a situation that should be a challenging conversation, and they come up with a very solid argument, and there's no provision for mechanical intervention there, then they have just solved that, which means, now it's back to me. I have to do more work. And if you're playing from the back foot. So I think, again, not saying this is something that happens to everybody or all the time, but I think that like when we're looking at the psychology behind why GMs don't want players to win, that's probably a large piece of it also.
Right. And I think just like to tag on the tangent real quick too, would be that when trying to construct NPCs, you are a reasonable person, and you will reason with your players who are also trying to be reasonable, and you will come to a reasonable conclusion. You sometimes just need to make NPCs a bit unreasonable in their demands. You need to have them ask for more than would normally be worth, because maybe they're just being dicks.
Oh no! I once drove a GM nuts because he was in a D&D game and he thought, well, that they're player characters, so they're greedy, selfish bastards. Or it's like one NPC, who's like, I'm going to kill all your friends. And I said, how much money would it take to stop you? And he said, 100,000 gold. And I said, sold. and like the GM's like jaw just drops. Like, you give up 100,000 gold? Says, yes, I'd give up 100,000 gold. Did you miss where it said good on my character sheet?
Yeah.
Hey, at least then you engage with the unreasonableness. We still put up the conflict, and then you solve the conflict. That feels a lot better now, though.
Well, at
least for a GM perspective.
That felt that he was not actually making a good faith offer. And I think this is where you have to have those limiters on conversations and what it is. Because yes, I think it would feel bad if you get badgered by the players, like, no, you have to accept this because I said so. And then you get into conversations like, well, yes, but this particular NPC might be a fanatic, or they might be, they might think in different ways, right?
Too much.
And I've already pointed out
something else, right? Yeah.
That you're right about that, about players acting in bad faith. That's why I'm complaining about modern adventures like D&D and Pathfinder have such a low opinion of story and players that they assume that you'll kill all the bad guys, and that the bad guys will have a letter on them confessing all of their crimes and telling you where to go to next. Because they know that players, first of all, are just going to kill them because they're supposed to. But if the NPC somehow survived, then the GM will try to connive some way to have the NPC escape at every opportunity. Or the players will be worried that the guy will escape, so they'll just kill him anyway. And there's that whole bad faith thing of, well, the players were supposed to win this encounter and this guy was supposed to die, so I need to connive a way for this guy to die to make the story make sense. And now you're trapped in this kind of feedback loop of, now the players stop asking questions and thinking laterally because they know it's supposed to go this way. And then you've just got a bunch of scripted. And like I say, it's the paradox here of, we've turned the game into a bunch of scripted combat encounters while simultaneously complaining that role-playing isn't a bunch of combat encounters.
Right, but like at the same time, like that assumption that the players will kill everything is a pretty reasonable one, given the way like D&D Fifth Edition is written, where you're supposed to kill everyone, and that's the way that the game itself is written. If
Which gives you a
everyone isn't
problem.
dead, the combat is still going on, and this is why, like, if a player got captured, they will continually ask every round, like, "Can I escape? Can I escape? Can I escape?"
Well,
And
it's
in a way, this is also what the NPCs do when you're GMing and you're going, well, what are they going to do now? Well, every round they get an action, right?
and it's it gives you a
So,
problem when you move to other games like Shadowrun or Vampire, where I mean I never shut up about Shadowrun. It's running in the shadows. Those are games that you're supposed to avoid combat or come to other ways to deal with stuff, because like Vampire is not only is Vampire's combat shitty, but it's not a combat game. And
Mhm.
Shadowrun, you're supposed to be committing crimes first and blowing up shit second. So, those games, you're supposed to find other ways to resolve this. And really, I just want to flip this around by saying, like, I like that idea of player success means more work for the GM. But I want to, like, totally undermine that by saying you don't have to plan for player failure. If the players fail, fuck, you're dead. That was easy. Time to make new characters. That's your problem. Players' success is what you should be planning for. You should be all of your planning should be, what if the players overcome this obstacle? I should have something ready for them. And that's, I think, one of the problems with a lot of design is that we're so absorbed to make sure we need to make sure this encounter is a big deal and takes an hour of playtime and has lots of moving parts for people to get through. Then you're in trouble if that takes 5 minutes. If you do the opposite and say, okay, I'm planning on this encounter only taking 5 or 10 minutes, let's start working on what happens next. Then if that encounter does take an hour, you still have all that planning left over. You should be planning for player success.
Here's a real life.
I don't want to talk too much about this because it fits into another. We're really rolling into another subject that we might discuss later. So, but I will say it ultimately, to me, maybe a bit too early to give an ultimate statement. It's about approach, right? It's ultimately about approach. You're disappointed because of what you bring into the scenario as a GM. What's getting disappointed is your expectations, and when your expectations are not met, that's when you're they're disappointed and angry. It's like, well, you won because you didn't expect them to win, or expect them to win too easily or something. So the real problem is expectations and how we go about expressing those and making the expectations. I think the problem is we're having the idea that we have expectations, and those expectations have to be made reality in the game. I think that's the ultimate problem here. That because I have an idea that I am the GM, and therefore this idea must be the thing that happens within maybe a set of scenarios, but it has to be this way.
Like I mentioned, the Mercer effect. You won't have Mercer effect problems in your game if you tell your players, hey, you're actors and you're here to fill 3 or 4 hours of time. If something happens and you don't like it, you roll with it as a professional actor. If you told your players that, you'd be fine. The Mercer effect only exists because the game tells people, no, it's free will, make your own story. Now, of course, I'm also saying, like, I'm not a big fan of that. I think if you're going to tell players it's going to be their own story, then you need to plan. Your game has to have less minutiae and more big picture of this story could go different ways and you need to roll with it. And some people might say, it's a game, I want to put all my work on a hard, week or whatever. We're supposed to, I just want to dungeon and chill. Then you're running that kind of game. And if you have that kind of player, that kind of Rosencrantz, that's fine. It's just, that's the game you're running.
New hobby, new meme of the week, dungeon and chill, everybody. Red, I think you
Let's
had
just
a point that
dungeon
you
and
were
chill.
going to make. What do you got?
Sorry about that, Red. Yeah, go ahead.
No, that's good. I was gonna mention the real life example from last week's Iron Claw game. We basically had one of those 3-hour combats. There was a lot of other stuff prepped for that game because I was half sure that the doctor was going to roll in and nuke every one of my zombies in the second round of combat. And although the doctor
I was expecting it
got
too.
there, right? We had two. What did you use? It wasn't retribution.
Fulgration.
Yeah. We had 2 of those, and both times they got stopped by lucky or unlucky rolls, I guess, halfway through the sweep. So, but yeah. So I think that's interesting. The idea that like if you plan for player success, you'll have more material, and you won't be in a situation where you don't have enough material. That's definitely a good one. While I have the spotlight, I also wanted to say that I had another point now. Crap. Oh god.
Well,
Okay, go take it.
Well, while you're thinking that, I do want to inject this one anecdote that I thought was bizarre. That I once had a player who, so we're doing an old school style D&D game where the players have to go somewhere. So the players are 6 weeks into the wilderness, and while they're there, they notice in the distance that they're being approached by a band of locals. So, and the locals have weapons. Now they're thinking, well, they're not screaming or banners, and we did invade their territory. So the players immediately do like 3 things. Like first, the players in charge of the expedition, the sponsor, says, okay, first of all, I put a shitload of points in charisma stuff because I'm in charge. So, I'm going to all of our NPCs go to this defensive location and wait, like go to the hill and just wait. Okay, you guys come with me. We'll go with nothing, and we'll go negotiate with them. And then this is important. The guy walks forward to negotiate with them, and the locals have a guy who can speak common. And our hero, having a high charisma, then rolls high on his diplomacy check. So we've passed 3 green flags here. Okay. They have a defensive position. They approach and said, hey, we're just passing through. We're not here to kill anybody or anything like that. And they also passed Rafferty's 3rd check, which is a high charisma. And so the locals say, okay, if you guys don't come by and raid our village or steal anything or screw that, you're here to go to the cursed temple. Good luck with that. I guess if you came all this way to commit suicide, go right ahead. We're going to go back to home. So all of those, but then I would actually have the player saying, well, that was too easy. That took like only 5 minutes. And I'm always flabbergasted by that moment of like, what did the player expect would happen? It's like you did everything right and you made the die rolls. They were almost disappointed that a fight didn't break out. It was like, what was the point of doing everything correctly in pro forma if I was just going to force a fight anyway? And
it would make all of that preface to it just be completely wasted time. Then you should just say, all right, you see them in the distance, roll initiative.
I wouldn't have had to listen. Yeah, we wouldn't have had the diplomacy of the far side. If you just wanted to kill all of them, you could have done it, or gotten a fight, because I made it very clear that, it's always weird to me. It was like that moment of like the player was almost disappointed that we weren't on script, and I think about that a lot because it was like, was the player of such a mindset that they were doing all this because they were expected to do this? We weren't even streaming. This wasn't for other people to see. This was just for us. So that's what precipitated this entire idea to me of, the idea that we would do a bunch of stuff even though it doesn't matter because we're already on a script. That people are being performative for that sake. And I think about that a lot. I just kind of wanted to mention that.
Again, I think that player had an expectation that if a group of armed men show up, or every so many minutes or part of the hour, you're going to have to get into a fight. It's like, well, why wouldn't get into a fight? But then it gets a situation that if the player decides, out of nowhere, cheats, takes out a sword and taps somebody, everybody else goes like, well, why did you do that? Well, aren't we supposed to get into fights?
Yeah,
right? Yeah. It's in everything an XP, bag of XP that gets me more powerful in this game.
Right, and if you look at it from a story perspective, if there's something at stake, why is anybody fighting each other? If they're guarding the road and the players are walking down the road, where's the conflict beyond they're just going down the road?
And to get back into the intelligent design, this was a point-based game. This player chose to have a high charisma. They made choices that made their character have diplomacy and have charisma. So as a GM, I'm thinking, if you chose that, that's the thing that always is weird with me. If you chose to be good at this, why are you surprised when it works?
maybe because often they don't even get a chance to use their current points. Like they're there, and it would be okay. I guess I have them, but I always have a sword or a spell, so the game is telling me that that's an option, and usually that's the option that goes. Again, it's expectations going in, right?
Right, because it's kind of like the opposite of what I usually experience in games like Vampire and Shadowrun, where I'm trying to be stealth or negotiation person, and it never pays off because the adventures are scripted that you're going to get in a fight with the brainworms in the sewer, or a bunch of ghouls are just going to ambush you, and they're going to ambush you no matter how your perception is anyway. So even if you wanted to be good at those things and defend against them, it's not going to work anyway. Maybe players are just used to that, which once again I can see why there are games like D&D that take a lot of this free will away from you. You will level up you'll pick one class because having two would be too complicated, and you will level up exactly on this track, and you will get this good at combat at every level. I mean, I can respect that they do that, because they're just kind of telling you don't have expectation.
Or maybe they're telling you to be a very narrow set of expectations. I think that's
right, as opposed to the lie where if you play a game like Vampire that says you can spend your XP on anything you want, by the way, I will, most GMs will smash you in the face and turn to ashes anything that they don't want to work anyway. So the free will is a lie. And, I'm just going to be over here in the camp of, that's also why you may have noticed the games that we publish, like the Iron Claw and the Urban Jungle, the game master actually gives you your upgrades, which is unusual for those games. We say, everyone earned swimming this adventure, or everyone earned local knowledge. And one of the reasons why that's in there is, because we're telling you as the GM what we want. I would take that one step further and tell you should, as a GM, not let players buy something that's useless. Like, you might just tell your players, don't buy sabotage. I will never let you disarm a trap that I want to go off.
Man, what a bold statement. If I heard that, I'd just bail out of a game immediately.
Right, now, if you heard that, but if you're experienced enough, you've probably been in a game where that was true. There was no point in buying diplomacy, because if you're supposed to win or lose, if you're supposed to get good or bad encounter, you just will. There's no I'm always flashing back to Apocalypse World as a two-page rant about how stealth is totally pointless in gaming and you should never do it. And that's amazing to me. Because I've been in role-playing games where you can never sneak past anything, so stealth, we'll let you buy it, but it doesn't work.
I gotta say, there's definitely a lot of trials and tribulations I've been through just trying to make stealth actually work, and the games do not help you.
I do have, and let me put a pin on this. I think as a tangential to this, and I come up with this, like sometimes there is a lot of combat because combat is usually the most rule-heavy aspect of many games, and so it's it just encourages, again, narrows your expectations to expect combat, and also to spruce things up, right? It's like, oh, you've been talking all that. I guess the GM is getting bored, so
you guys
shows up,
right? Bust into the room.
Yeah, a bomb goes off, right? It's the idea that if you want something exciting in a book or something, a bomb has to go off. So it's like, you just talked through all this stuff and you're doing great, but I'm getting bored because there's not action here, right? Again, expectations, and you go like, I don't know, you hear a peeping sound, and you turn around and there's a clock in the wall and it's counting down to 0. It's a bomb. Run, or dodge, or safe, or explosion, or whatever, right?
Yeah, when we think about, a lot of people approach these games like, as theory crafters. Their characters are like their battle bot, right? They put all of this time and attention into the specific mechanics that they want them to use, and then the game is more just like the arena where all of their preparations can be tested and see, they can watch the mechanics play out. So if you're placed into a situation and someone makes a good argument that completely avoids a combat scenario, well, that means that you now just missed an opportunity to test out your combat, synergy that you set up before. So that might be another aspect too.
Right.
And I think it would be fair within all this to remember that combat is still a choice players can make and can make for their characters, and still want to have validated every now and then. They've opted in to do so.
And that's why I'm saying that's a paradox, that every almost every tabletop role-playing game will tell you, oh, it's not just about combat. But and also sort of related to that, when I agree also, if someone's really kitted out for combat, they probably want to do it. Now in this era we have skills, because skills used to be optional in D&D. They were non-weapon proficiency. It's my favorite word. Now that players can choose to put abilities in their characters that are other things, like vampire, you've got a whole long list of social skills to buy that players are going to want to buy those, and they're going to want those to work. And so I mean, yeah, like I keep saying, like it's they're gonna, just like the same logic that if I bought a bunch of fighting stuff, I want to fight. If I bought a bunch of lateral move stuff, I'm going to want that to work. I'm going to want to talk my way out of something or sneak past something. And I think it's really important that the game master, like, we should be paying attention to what people are putting on their sheets. I think that's a huge mistake, that a lot of people assume that role-playing is something nebulous, and what their sheet is just a bunch of numbers that maybe we look at. In this era of intelligent design, what they're putting on their sheets is their character and what they want to do. If they buy appearance bonuses or diplomacy or stealth or those kinds of abilities, that is their character. And so,
right. And as a GM, you need to look at that and go, well, they've bought these things. Let's make a scenario where this can happen.
And more importantly, if those abilities change or derail the scenario in a way that wasn't scripted, you really only have yourself to blame, because as the GM, you should know what's on their character sheets. I keep railing against homebrew and local mods because, like, they make the game less universal. But a proper response to that is, well, the game doesn't have to be universal; it just has to be for us. Okay, but if the game is just for us, you need to know who we are, and you need to, like, be prepared for what we want to do. You can't write a nebulous thing out here, and you can't have it both ways. You can't say, we're going to be highly idiosyncratic to our group. By the way, I'm going to script something outside of all of that, and it's going to happen the way I want, not the way we want.
Right. So let's go ahead and get a couple concluding statements then. So, Red, what would you conclude all of this off with for making winning fun?
So it seems like a lot of our examples today have stemmed from, I think Lessons actually said it the most direct, which is this idea that when you come to the game with expectations, and those expectations get, are blown away, kind of. That's where a lot of, I think, this particular stress comes from, the feeling that success in games is not as much fun, right? And maybe it's from the GM's perspective. Sometimes it can be from the player's perspective. What I've been thinking about this whole time is for me, the dream of system mastery is specifically like bringing you to a place where you can deal with these things. For me, system mastery is this idea that, like, okay, I understand the system well enough that we can just play the ball where it lands, see what happens, construct a narrative scene that makes sense, and then quickly and instinctively apply the mechanics on top of that makes sense. So that's the way that I try to combat a lot of this, is to do that, is to be able to look at a scene, say, what's the next thing that makes narrative sense for this story? And then instantly say, like, okay, that means I grab this stat block, or that means that this could contain roles that use these specific skills. It's still true to the narrative, and yet it considers the prep work that people put in and the mechanics that people put into their characters. But it's not easy to do. So that's the trick. And it's kind of contrarian to the way a lot of games adventures are written.
Mm-hmm.
And what about you, Lessons? What do you got to conclude today?
I think I'll add to that a small caveat, which is something you can sometimes use and used to be said a lot, usually in a lot of, all DM advice and GM advice, is like, sometimes you just gotta stop the game and go like, listen, guys, I'm prepared for this. Give me like five minutes. Everybody got to get a smoke break, right? Or get some chips or something, because sometimes that can happen. And when you master the rules, the idea is that those things will happen less and less and less, because you'll have, and I'm going to, call to a future episode, you're going to have a toolbox that will allow you to, deal with those things. but we'll talk more about that. And I will just repeat the thing before, that usually this is about expectations, right? It's what you bring to the table that defines whether or not you think something is worth winning, and whether it feels good or not to win or lose.
Okay. Rafferty, do you want to give one last quick little word?
I mean, I agree with all those statements. That yeah, I hadn't thought about it too much about how people using the rules to win the scenario in a way you hadn't thought of, because that's been something that's come up before. If some player points out some obscure rule, that's why I'm always going to reinforce that. I really think every game should have a debriefing session, and I don't think you need to memorize everything the characters. You don't necessarily need to know the rules. You need to know what the players expect their characters to do. In this era of intelligent design, everything on that character sheet was chosen by the player. So everything on their sheet is something they are going to want to use and want to work. So you should read their sheets every now and then and keep up to date on what the player is doing, because they're telling you what it is that they're going to do on their sheets. And if you don't necessarily understand that, because the player only has to memorize their rules, you have to know all of them if you're the game host. You can ask the player directly, like, what it is they want to do, and they might actually tell you. It's not PC versus GM. Everyone's here to have a good time. But
Right.
yeah, I
As
think
always, communication is important.
communication is important, especially if you're going to do this homebrew wing. It's going to be just for us. Then you need to know what we want. But once again,
There we go.
I think we really, to wrap all this up, the players are telling you what they want to do by showing you a character sheet.
There we go then. So, we'll go ahead and wrap it up there then. So, that's all for today. For Notes from the Aleph, we stream episodes bi-weekly, Fridays at 2 p.m. Eastern. You can come join us live at twitch.tv/Ractus. We also stream and record weekly tabletop games at the same channel, and you can come join us when we start at 10 a.m., 2 p.m., and 6 p.m. Eastern Standard Time on Sundays and Wednesdays. Norm Rafferty here is a partner and writer of Sanguine Games. Check out sanguinegames.com, join us on Reddit and Twitter, and look forward to the upcoming Book of Coral's Ironclaw expansion book. Don't forget to check out RedRabbit and book him for a game over on startplaying.games as RedRabbit. And don't forget to look up Lessons Learned as Lessons Learned 1 on Twitch and YouTube. Check out all of his content, find his books on Amazon, and honestly, look forward to all the cool things he's going to make for us. And of course, as always, be sure to like, comment, subscribe, and come see us all again. Until next time, everybody.